Let's have a look at Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein. We're also going to be looking at Condoleezza Rice, Diana Mosley, there's a Unity Mitford, Harper Lee, Salvador Dali, Jean-François Lyotard, Michel Foucault, Judith Butler, Jacques Derrida, Albert Camus, and Roger Scruton. Naomi Klein versus the Buddha, the critic of corporate control versus the teacher of inner freedom, contrast and critique. Naomi Klein, renowned author of No Logo, and This Changes Everything, critiques the greed and exploitation inherent in global capitalism. She wrote, "The quest for profit is at odds with the planet, with dignity, with justice." Klein's activism exposes how unchecked greed destroys communities and ecosystems. The Buddha, too, warned against greed, but went deeper, teaching greed is not just in systems, but in the heart. End it there, and the world will follow. While Klein fights external systems, the Buddha dismantles greed at its root within the mind. Quark and resilience. Klein's is characterized by relentless activism, using her work as tools to galvanize resistance. She stated, "When you talk about the climate crisis, you are talking about a failure of imagination, the inability to think beyond the profit motive." The Buddha, while also challenging delusion, might observe, imagination can inspire, but freedom arises through clarity, seeing beyond both systems and ideals. Imagine Klein asking the Buddha, "How do we fight greed on such a massive scale?" The Buddha might reply, "Fight greed in your own heart first. The ripple will change the world." Attachment to activism. Klein's commitment to justice and sustainability is unshakable, but even noble causes can breed attachment. The Buddha cautioned, clinging to righteousness, even for justice, can bind the mind. Act wisely, but let go of the need for results. Where Klein channels passion into resistance, the Buddha channels compassion into freedom. Justice without anger, effort without clinging. These create lasting peace. Sutta twist, the Buddha might have shared the loka vaga, worldly affairs, which critiques attachment to gain and loss. The world is swept by gain, loss, fame, blame, pleasure, and pain. The wise rise above them, unshaken. Klein, deeply committed to her activism, might ask, but how do we create change without anger? The Buddha, serene, would reply, anger can tear down, but only wisdom and compassion can build what endures. This comparison highlights Naomi Klein's incisive critique of systemic greed and contrasts it with the Buddha's teaching of inner transformation as the foundation for sustainable change. That resonates. Let's pivot to Condoleezza Rice. Condoleezza Rice versus the Buddha, the strategist of power versus the teacher of powerlessness. Contrasting power, Condoleezza Rice, the former US Secretary of State, wielded immense influence on the global stage, shaping foreign policy during pivotal moments in history. She declared, "Great powers don't get to retire." Rice's focus was on strategy, control, and maintaining dominance. The Buddha, by contrast, rejected all notions of worldly power, teaching, true power is found in letting go of control. The greatest strength is in knowing one's own mind. While Rice worked to maintain global influence, the Buddha dismantled the illusion of power itself. Quirk and discipline. Known for her unyielding discipline, Rice combined intellect and pragmatism to rise to unprecedented heights, famously stating, "I believe you make your own luck by the way you prepare for the world." The Buddha, too, valued preparation, but turned it inward. Prepare not for worldly gains, but for the end of craving. This is the true preparation for freedom. Imagine Rice asking the Buddha, "But how can we prepare for a chaotic world?" The Buddha might reply, "By calming your mind. A steady mind weathers all storms." Attachment to outcomes. Rice's career was defined by her commitment to security and progress, often tied to measurable results. The Buddha recognized this to strive, but warned against clinging to outcomes because they're impermanent. Strive without attachment, and peace will follow. While Rice sought stability through strategy, the Buddha revealed the instability of all strategies. Even the best laid plans crumble. Freedom lies in releasing or clinging to plans. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Chanki Sutta, which critiques reliance on power and authority. The wise do not cling to power or status. They let go of all dependencies and see the truth for themselves. Rice, pragmatic and resolute, might ask, "But isn't power necessary to protect the world?" The Buddha, calm and clear, would reply, "Protection comes not from power, but through wisdom and compassion. A mind free from fear and craving protects all beings." This comparison explores Condoleezza Rice's pursuit of global stability through strategy and contrasts it with the Buddha's teaching of relinquishing control and finding true freedom in wisdom. I think that resonates. Let's bring Diana Mosley in. Diana Mosley versus the Buddha. The fascist socialite versus the teacher of non-attachment. Contrasting allegiance, Diana Mosley, the glamorous Mitford sister, became infamous for her allegiance to fascism and her close relationship with Adolf Hitler and Oswald Mosley. She declared, "I admired him as a leader, and I believed in his vision." Mosley's devotion to a political ideology bound her to one of history's darkest chapters. The Buddha, by contrast, taught freedom from all ideologies. Views, no matter how noble or extreme, create clinging. Let go of all views and the mind will be unshaken. Where Diana placed her faith in a flawed leader, the Buddha guided beings to rely on their own insight. Quirk and charisma, Diana was known for her wit, beauty, and unapologetic loyalty to her ideals, even as they led to her internment during World War II. She once remarked, You can't descend your beliefs just because they become unfashionable." The Buddha, too, valued integrity, but he warned against clinging to beliefs. Belief, when rigid, blinds the mind. Wisdom is flexible and sees the truth beyond opinions. Imagine Diana asking the Buddha, "But isn't loyalty to a cause admirable?" The Buddha might reply, "Loyalty without wisdom leads to suffering. True loyalty is to compassion and understanding. Attachment to privilege and identity." Diana's aristocratic background shaped her identity and worldview, which she clung to despite its consequences. The Buddha, born into privilege himself, abandoned it to seek liberation. Wealth, status, and identity are impermanent. Clinging to them only deepens suffering. Where Diana sought meaning in hierarchy and allegiance, the Buddha saw the liberation in equality and non-attachment. So to twist, the Buddha might have shared the Ambalatika Rahuvala Sutta, where he teaches his son Rahula to reflect on the effects of his actions. Reflect if they bring harm to others. If they do, abandon them. Diana, steadfast in her controversial views, might respond, but I believed in what I was doing. The Buddha would reply, belief is not enough. Reflect deeply on its consequences. This is where wisdom begins. Unity Mitford versus the Buddha, the romantic nationalist versus the teacher of liberation from desire. Contrasting longing, Unity Mitford, another Mitford sister, became infamous for her infatuation with Adolf Hitler and her fervent nationalism. Her devotion to Hitler was obsessive, marked by a longing to be close to power and greatness. She wrote, I was born to love him. The Buddha, too, understood longing, but saw it as the root of suffering. Longing binds the heart. Free yourself from desires, and peace arises. While unity sought fulfillment in external devotion, the Buddha guided beings inward to transcend all longing. Quirk and obsession. Unity's extreme attachment to Hitler defined her life, even leading her to attempt suicide when war broke out. Her single-minded reflected a dangerous devotion, blind to its consequences. The Buddha would have seen this as a stark example of craving's destructive power. Desire, unchecked, consumes the mind. It leaves not to fulfillment, but to suffering. Imagine unity asking the Buddha, how can I stop loving something so deeply? The Buddha might reply, love that clings brings sorrow. Let go, and love becomes boundless, free from suffering. Attachment to identity and ideals, Unity's devotion, the nationalism and her own identity as part of the Mitford legacy illustrates the traps of clinging to ideologies and roles. The Buddha taught, neither nation, name, nor role defines you. These are fleeting constructs. See beyond them, and you will find freedom. Where unity clung to an external savior, the Buddha guided seekers to rely on their own efforts and insights. Sutta twist, the Buddha might have shared the Dvaita Vitakka Sutta, two kinds of thought, which distinguishes between thoughts that lead to suffering and those that lead to freedom. Thoughts rooted in craving, hatred, and delusion lead to harm. Abandon these, and the mind will be clear. Unity, consumed by her passion, might say that my devotion is what gives my life meaning. The Buddha would gently respond, meaning tied to craving fades. Freedom from craving brings unshakable peace. These comparisons highlight the Mitford sisters' controversial lives, their clinging to identity and ideologies, and contrast them with the Buddha's path of non-attachment, wisdom, and universal compassion. So this resonates too. Let's bring Harper Lee into focus next. Harper Lee versus the Buddha. The quiet observer of injustice versus the teacher of true injustice. Contrasting justice. Harper Lee, the reclusive author of To Kill a Mockingbird, explored themes of racism, morality, and the courage to confront injustice. She wrote, the one thing that doesn't apply by a majority rule is a person's conscience. Lee's work champions empathy and moral integrity, reflecting her belief in justice through understanding. The Buddha, too, taught justice, but rooted it in compassion and wisdom. True justice arises not in judgment, but in seeing clearly, adapting with kindness, while Lee exposed the world's injustice. The Buddha revealed its deeper cause in craving, aversion, and delusion. Quirk and humility. Lee's quiet life contrasted with the profound impact of her work, which influenced generations. She famously said, "I never expected any sort of success with Mockingbird. I hoped for a quick and merciful death at the hands of the reviewers." The Buddha, too, lived simply, letting his teachings speak for themselves. Do not praise or blame me. Listen to the Dhamma and see for yourself if it leads to peace. Imagine Lee asking the Buddha, how can we fight injustice without becoming bitter? The Buddha might reply, injustice is defeated not by hatred, but by compassion and understanding. Attachment to stories and ideals leaves not to those will shape consciousness by telling a story of moral courage, but even noble ideals can bind the heart. The Buddha taught, stories and ideals, however noble, are still fabrications. Let go of the need to cling to them, and you will find the unshakable truth, while the storytelling revealed the best and worst in humanity. The Buddha guided beings to transcend storytelling altogether. The mind, freed from stories, is at peace. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Kuttadanta Sutta, where he explains that true justice arises not from punishment, but from addressing the causes of wrongdoing, where greed, hatred, and delusion are removed. Just as naturally prevails. Lee, reflective, might respond, but stories help people see the truth. The Buddha, serene, would say, stories point at truth, but truth lies beyond words. See it for yourself, and you will no longer need stories. This comparison highlights Harper Lee's moral clarity, her quiet yet powerful influence, and contrasts it with the Buddha's teachings on justice as compassion, understanding, and the end of clinging. This also resonates. Let's have a look at another person, Salvador Dali versus the Buddha, the surrealist of illusion versus the teacher of reality. Contrast in reality and illusion. Salvador Dali, the master of Surrealism, blurred the lines between real and unreality with his melting clocks, his distorted forms and dreamscapes. He declared, "I don't do drugs. I am drugs." Dali celebrated the absurdity of existence, warping perception to explore deeper truths. The Buddha, too, recognized the illusory nature of reality, but went beyond it, teaching, life as a dream. See through it, and you will awaken. Clinging to illusions, however vivid, only deepens suffering, while Dali embraced the bizarre. The Buddha sought clarity. What arises in the mind, dream, image, or thought, is not real. See it, let it go, and be free. Quirk and persona. Dali lived as art itself, cultivating an eccentric persona. From his iconic moustache to his declarations like, "Every morning, upon awakening, I experience a supreme pleasure, that of being Salvador Dali." He thrived on attention and self-mythology. The Buddha, by contrast, dismantled the illusion of self. This I, this me, is a construct. Let go of the need to be anyone, and peace will arise. Imagine Dali showing the Buddha the persistence of memory, asking, "Isn't time itself just a surreal dream?" The Buddha might reply, time is an illusion. It arises with perception and ceases with perception. Why cling to what is unreal? Attachment to creativity and form. Dali's life was devoted to creative outputs, bending form and expectation to reveal a distorted beauty. He said, "Have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it." The Buddha would acknowledge creativity as an expression, but caution against attachment to it. Even the most brilliant creation is impermanent. Clinging to art, identity, or perception binds the mind, where Dali revels in the strange. The Buddha taught liberation from all fabrications. Forms are empty. Illusions are fleeting. See through them, and you will find peace. Sutta twist, the Buddha might have shared the Bahya Sutta, which teaches direct seeing. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the imagined, let go of the imagined. When there is no you in what is seen, freedom arises. Dali, playful and provocative, might reply, "But where's the fun in not seeing the absurd?" The Buddha, serene, would answer, "See the absurd, but do not cling to it. True freedom lies beyond creation and destruction." This comparison contrasts with Lee's playful embrace of illusion, eccentric creativity, and self-absorption with the Buddha's teachings on seeing through illusion to the unshakable reality beyond form. It hits a surreal mark. Let's have a look at Jean-François Lyotard from the nearby neighborhood. Jean-François Lyotard, the critic of grand narratives versus the teacher of ultimate truth, contrasting narratives. Jean-François Lyotard, the postmodern philosopher, famously critiqued grand narratives, their overarching stories like religion, progress, or science that societies use to define truths. He wrote, "Simplifying to the extreme, I define postmodernism as gratuity towards meta-narratives." Lyotard questioned absolute truths, arguing that knowledge is fragmented and relative. The Buddha, while also rejecting rigid doctrines, offered a singular, experiential truth. The ultimate truth is not his story, but a direct seeing, the ending of suffering through understanding. When Lyotard exposed the cracks in grand narratives, the Buddha revealed what lies beyond all stories. Quirk and suspicion. Lyotard believed that language, science, and philosophy imposed power structures shaping how we interpret the world. He wrote, "Knowledge is not made for understanding. It is made for cutting." The Buddha, too, sought the limits of language. Words point to the truth, but they are not the truth. Let go of concepts, and the mind will find freedom. Imagine Lyotard asking the Buddha, "If all truths are constructs, how can we trust anything?" The Buddha might reply, "Trust in direct experience. See for yourself that craving causes suffering, and its absence brings peace." Attachment to relativism. Lyotard's radical critique shadowed certainty but left behind a landscape of fragmentation. The Buddha acknowledged that concepts are empty, but did not stop there. He taught, relative truth exists, but ultimate truth is beyond all views, all fragmentation. It is the unshakable stillness of a liberated mind, where Lyotard dismantled structures. The Buddha guided beings to transcend even the need to dismantle, neither clinging to structures nor reject them. Freedom lies in understanding their nature. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Kachaya Gota Sutta, where he explains the middle way between extremes. Kachayana Gota. The wise see beyond both, walking the path of clarity and peace. Lyotard, skeptical but intrigued, might ask, but is there no meaning then to be found? The Buddha would respond, meaning arises and passes. Truth is not found in meaning, but in freedom from the need for meaning. This comparison highlights Lyotard's postmodern deconstruction of truth and grand narratives, contrasting it with the Buddha's middle path, the truth at last beyond language, views, or systems. Let's move on to Michel Foucault while we're in the area. Okay, unfortunately. Michel Foucault versus the Buddha, the analyst of power versus the teacher of liberation from power. Contrast in power. Michel Foucault, called the post-structuralist philosopher, explored how power operates through institutions, language, and knowledge systems. He wrote, "Power is everywhere, not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everywhere." Foucault revealed how we internalize power structures, shaping our identities and behaviors. The Buddha, too, recognized power's pervasive nature, but offered a way out. Power over others leads to bondage. Power over oneself leads to freedom. True liberation arises when the mind is no longer controlled by craving or fear. Quirk and resistance. Foucault's life and work challenged norms, questioning prisons, sexuality, and institutions. He declared, "Where there is power, there is resistance." Well, for Foucault, resistance was vital for autonomy and truth. The Buddha, while recognizing resistance as necessary to break harmful patterns, taught a subtler form of rebellion. The greatest resistance is non-attachment. By refusing to grasp at power, identity, or control, the mind becomes free. Imagine Foucault telling the Buddha, to resist is to exist, to challenge the forces that define us. The Buddha might reply, challenge, but do not cling. Resistance with attachment brings suffering. True freedom is not defined by opposition. Attachment to identity and systems. Foucault, he examined how power produces an indisciplined side and leaving individuals trapped within systems they cannot fully see. He said, "Do not ask who I am, and do not ask me to remain the same." The Buddha, too, dismantled identity, teaching this self, created by conditions, exempty of essence. Let go of the need to be anyone, and freedom arises. Where Foucault explored identity as a construct of power, the Buddha transcended identity altogether. There is no self to define or confine. See this, and you will no longer be bound. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Chula Vedala Sutta, which explores the nature of selflessness, form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. All are not self. To see this clearly is to be free. Foucault, deeply invested in unmasking systems, might respond, but power is unavoidable. How do we escape its grasp? The Buddha would reply, power holds the mind only if you cling. Let go, and power loses its hold. This comparison contrasts Foucault's sharp analysis of power and identity with the Buddha's teaching, liberation through non-attachment, freedom beyond systems, definitions, and control. Next person, let's have a look at the transformative ideas of Judith Butler. Judith Butler versus the Buddha, the deconstructor of gender versus the teacher of non-self. Contrasting identity, Judith Butler, the philosopher and pioneer of gender theory, challenged the idea of gender as fixed, arguing instead that it is performative, constructed through repeated acts. She wrote, "Gender is not something one is, it is something one does," and exposed identity as a fraud and shifted identity. The Buddha too taught that identity, including gender, is an illusion. This is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. Where Butler revealed identity's constructed nature, the Buddha offered a path beyond all constructs to liberation. When you let go of self, freedom arises unshaken by labels or roles. Quirk and performativity. Butler's idea of performity reveals how societal norms shape our sense of self and force us to act in certain ways to fit expectations. They asked, what kind of subversion is possible when the very language we use defines who we are? The Buddha similarly saw language and roles as part of the conditioned world. Words create concepts. Concepts bind the mind. To see truth, let go of the need to perform. Imagine Butler challenging the Buddha, saying, but even rejecting identity is itself a performance. The Buddha might reply, to reject is still to cling. Freedom lies in neither rejecting nor performing, simply seeing all as impermanent, attachment to roles and liberation. Butler's work inspires resistance against imposed roles, opening possibilities for new ways of being. Yet the Buddha would caution that even resistance can become a form of clinging. He taught, to be free is not to seek another role, but to transcend all roles. Identity is a mask. Remove it, and you will find peace. While Butler dismantled rigid categories, the Buddha dismantles the illusion of self entirely. The greatest liberation is to see there is no I to define or defend. So to twist, the Buddha might have shared the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the discourse on not-self, where he explains form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness are not self. When this is known, the mind is liberated. Butler, deeply attuned to language and power, might say, but language itself defines how we experience freedom. The Buddha, serene, would reply, language creates the cage, but wisdom lets you see the door. Freedom is beyond words and definitions. This comparison highlights Butler's profound critique of identity and performativity, contrasting it with the Buddha's radical teaching on non-self, a path to complete liberation from roles, language, and constructs. I think that resonates. Let's take on Jacques Derrida next. Jacques Derrida versus the Buddha, the deconstructor of texts versus the teacher of liberation beyond words. Contrast in language, in meaning. Jacques Derrida, the founder of deconstruction, exposed the instability of language and meaning. He argued, there is nothing outside the text. Words, according to Derrida, are endlessly deferred, always pointing to other words, never to fixed truths. The Buddha, too, recognized the limits of language, but went further. Words point the way, but are not the destination. Truth lies beyond concepts and direct experience. While Derrida deconstructed meaning. The Buddha dismantled the very need for meaning, offering liberation through silence and seeing things as they are. Quirk and playfulness. Derrida approached philosophy with playful subversion, overturning binaries, speech versus writing, presence versus absence, to reveal their dependence on each other. He wrote, "Meaning is not singular, it is a play of differences." The Buddha, while also transcending dualities, taught a middle path, neither this nor that. Do not cling to opposites. The truth is found in balance, where the mind is free. Imagine Derrida telling the Buddha, there is no center, no stable truth, only endless deferral. The Buddha might respond, yes, all constructs are empty, but see beyond this, and you will find the unconditioned, where there is no need to defer. Attachment to deconstruction. Derrida's relentless questioning revealed the emptiness of fixed ideas, but it often left a sense of incompleteness or fragmentation. The Buddha agreed that all views are empty and taught that freedom comes from abandoning all views. Even the view that there is no truth binds the mind. Release all views and you will know the peace beyond the questioning. Where Derrida circled endlessly within language, the Buddha offered a path out. Language creates the prison. Wisdom opens the door. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Madhu Pindika Sutta, the honey ball discourse, which explains how concepts arise through perception and proliferate endlessly. Dependent on contact, there is perception. Perception gives rise to thinking, which spreads like a net. Cut through this net and you will find freedom. Derrida, fascinated, might ask, but what remains when we cut through everything? The Buddha, calm and clear, would reply, what remains cannot be spoken. It is the unshakable peace of the unconditioned. This comparison contrasts Derrida's exploration of the endless instability of meaning with the Buddha's teaching on going beyond language and concepts to experience the ultimate truth. Ready to tackle Albert Camus again. Albert Camus. This comparison contrasts Camus' existential embrace with the absurd and human struggle with the Buddha's path of wisdom, transcending struggle and meaninglessness to discover profound, peaceful liberation. Let's explore Roger Scruton, actually. Let's leave Camus. Roger Scruton versus the Buddha, the defender of tradition versus the teacher of timeless truth. Contrasting values, Roger Scruton, the conservative philosopher, championed tradition, beauty, and the sacred as foundations for a meaningful life. He wrote, "Beauty matters. It is not just a subjective thing, but a universal need of human beings." For Scruton, cultural heritage and shared values grounded in individuals in a fractured world. The Buddha, too, recognized the value of beauty and order, but revealed their impermanence. What is beautiful arises and fades. Cling not to tradition or form. Know their nature, and you will find true peace. Whereas Scruton defended external structures, the Buddha pointed to freedom beyond all forms. Quirk and reverence. Scruton revered cultural traditions of the West, from architecture to music, seeing them as pathways to transcendence. He wrote, "Traditions are solutions to problems we thought we had." But the Buddha, honoring customs that lead to wholesome states, urged caution. Tradition can serve, but it can also bind. Question it, and keep only what leads to freedom and compassion. Imagine Scruton telling the Buddha, tradition connects us to the sacred and gives life order. The Buddha might respond, order can calm the mind, but do not mistake order for liberation. Freedom is found by letting go, not by holding on. Attachment to permanence and beauty. Scruton believed that beauty and sacred values provide stability in an ever-changing world. He argued, human beings flourish when they are connected to something beyond themselves. The Buddha also taught the importance of transcendence, but he revealed that beauty, like all conditioned things, is impermanent. Stability, ruminating form, will falter. True stability comes when you see beyond form, beyond beauty, to the unconditioned. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Kalama Sutta, which encourages individuals to test traditions for themselves. Do not hold to tradition, hearsay, or authority. Follow what leads to wisdom, kindness, and freedom. Scruton, respectful but firm, might respond, but without tradition, we lose meaning and connection. The Buddha would reply, meaning is fleeting. Connection to the timeless truth is what frees you. Look beyond what is inherited and see for yourself. This comparison contrasts Roger Scruton's reverence for tradition, beauty, and cultural continuity with the Buddha's teaching of transcending all forms and attachments to find the timeless, unshakable truth. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope this has helped us relieve some of the questions in our Western minds.